So I do want to say a few things beforehand. So I am the publisher at PLOS, but as Katrina said, I have been in publishing for a very long time, and I've been part of technology for a very long time and how it delivers what we're trying to do from a publishing standpoint. So some of this will be my opinion, my thinking, as well as some of the experiences that PLOS has had and what we've seen in the industry. It is not comprehensive. If we really want to talk about open infrastructure and scholarly communication, we'll be here for a couple of days. So this is meant to be exemplary. Nobody's meant to be left out. And there are definitely holes. So I'm expecting some good questions and hopefully, because it's warm, some softball questions at the end. So who are we? I had to change to my 13 to 14 years because I didn't have a graphic for the 14. We are the Public Library of Science. We are a nonprofit publisher, and we're also an advocacy organization in the field of open access. We were not the first one on the field, without question. But we've definitely been one of the loudest ones, or we're the most noisy, and as several of our board members like to say, some of the most disruptive, about setting an example for what open access can be, what it can do, and what open research really means, open communication of our research potential. At the beginning, we did not actually really want to start journals. We actually really wanted to go into the field of doing open research without journals. But 14 years ago, and even today, that would be very hard to do. And so PLOS did enter the world with 7 journals, plus 1, as well as 6 selective journals. So just to give you a sense of how big we are in terms of our scale and our size, this is a screenshot that we do each year. And so we'll do another one, obviously, at the end of this year. But PLOS works at a fairly large scale for an open access publisher. We publish somewhere anywhere between 27 and 30,000 papers a year. We review about twice as many of those, or we receive about twice as many of those. We get a lot of access, we got a lot of downloads, we have a lot of attention, a lot of Twitter. But I think what also is very important is that we work with 7,000 editors and 78,000 reviewers. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of volunteers in order to keep moving and keep distributing throughout our ecosystem. And so that's a challenge. So when we talk about infrastructure, when we talk about changing infrastructure, we talk about moving this kind of scale around. And so that's something that I want everyone here to sort of understand, that moving a big ship is either like a Titanic or it's like a big cruise ship. And these are not little speedboats, and it's harder for a publisher of this size. And there are publishers here that are way bigger than PLOS in order to make these kinds of changes in an infrastructure way. So when we think about our role, we think of ourselves as a publisher. We also think of ourselves as an editor, a part of the editorial community, and as well as an innovator. And so what do we try to do? And this is true for all of us in this room. We try certainly to improve authorship practices for accountability and credit. These are all themes that you're going to hear throughout this meeting and you've already heard this morning. Adopting technology standards that are scalable and can become part of the research infrastructure. Many of us work in our garages, and when we open up the garage door, we all have the same wheel. And so there is a certain amount of standard technology that we could all be adopting that could help us all lift up a little bit more easily to the next level. We facilitate models that could really change our publishing ecosystem, such as, and this is something we've been talking about, decoupling dissemination from evaluation. Because the time it takes in order to evaluate content, to do that research assessment, takes time. And you just saw, it takes a lot of people. And so marshaling all of that is definitely slowing down the research communication cycle. We definitely want to handle research misconduct. We want to be responsible citizens. We want to make sure that what is shared in the research space is in fact viable, is reasonable, and actually won't create a health hazard or create a problem. I will touch on open science, but I think that open science has a very large interpretation, a lot of definitions that go around for a lot of different people. So I will kind of touch on it, but I'm not going to try to define it here, because I think that the world of open science is still open to us in terms of what we're going to be doing. But I think that what is very true when it comes to infrastructure and what we do on a day-to-day basis is that we are all, in some way, shape, or form, operating with some technology that is over 20 years old. And that is startling in many ways. Even Google is about 20 years old. And a lot of us use or think of Google as our visibility technique or our dissemination technique. These are really important things to keep in mind. So when we look at our infrastructure, we also have to think about what we're replacing, what do we rely on now, and how hard would it be to change that. So when we think about all the different technologies that were around 20 years ago, these have all been replaced. You know, these are not technologies that we rely on now in the same shape that they're in now. And I've included Federal Express as actually an example of, from a publishing standpoint, the world of review and dissemination, not dissemination, of the peer review process happened with these packages. They would go in these little envelopes, and in fact, they almost became filing systems for publishers. They'd have walls of Federal Express envelopes. Now, FedEx still exists, obviously, but for its role that we use it for in terms of peer review, that's changed significantly. So how do we match technology and infrastructure for a successful outcome? What is it that we're trying to do? If we go back to what we're trying to do related to exposing research, enhancing reproducibility, making sure that there isn't misconduct, and helping the researcher experience as a whole, do we have the right technologies to do that? Do we actually have what we need in order to do that? So PLOS works through infrastructure as well as through policy and advocacy in order to change some of the publishing cycle. So we have written software to enable our mission. Partly is because we were born digital. We were also born open access. And some of the things that we wanted to do didn't exist. So we had to create something 14 years ago. And that's changed. For a lot of you who are newbies and newer into the industry, that has changed a lot. And so we're watching, this is sort of what I want to summarize, is some of the things that have changed. So several years ago, we developed the article level metrics display on our site, which displays, all the different kinds of usage that has happened for an article. And it was really meant to displace and really change the conversation around impact factor. Impact factors are about journals. We all agree that there's something flawed and very wrong with it. It's a fine metric for what it measures, but it's not a metric for a brand or for a decision for publication. But it still exists. And so we developed this in order to change that world. Now, it took a long time for others to use it as well. So the alt metrics that has come up. But somebody picking up this code, because it was open source, it took a long time. So only last year, Crossref has picked it up. And they have said they have taken the code and they've adapted it and they've amended it for their event tracker, which is in beta now. And I'm not sure what the schedule is for that, but I'm hoping that it comes out soon, because even we would like to pick that up, because it raises the water level for all of us to be able to have this kind of code and this kind of display available to all of us. We also spent some time working on our display technology. Now, this is probably something that many technology organizations work with. What are we wrapping this article with? And a lot of us have peppered it with lots of different links, lots of different information, lots of different context in order to give the reader somewhere to go. And what's happening now is that, and this is affecting us now, is Sci-Hub. Now, what's interesting about Sci-Hub, and I know it's very contentious, but what is interesting about Sci-Hub and PLOS is that up until now, they ignored us. They pointed all traffic to PLOS. So if somebody went to Sci-Hub and typed in a PLOS DOI, they came over to PLOS. So we didn't lose any of that traffic. We didn't lose any of those eyeballs. That's changed. So Sci-Hub is now mirroring all of the PLOS content. They're mirroring all of PubMed. They're mirroring all of PubMed Central. And they're trying to basically create that ecosystem within their walls. Now, they have kept our brand. They have kept a lot of information about us, but everything that you see on this page that has a link doesn't work anymore. And all the PubMed stuff stays within the Sci-Hub. So what happens? What are we doing here? Are we creating a lot of decoration that readers don't actually want? You know, if Sci-Hub's good enough, and that's a cul-de-sac, they go in, they read that article, they come back out. So are we doing the right thing? Are we matching the technology and with the needs of our readers with all of this badging and decoration and linking and context and semantics? So it's something for us to really consider as we move forward with lots of different technologies. The other thing that we're also still stuck on is that link called download PDF. That PDF still exists. The fact that we still create PDFs, rely on PDFs as a portable format, it works. But what is the next thing? How are we going to replace that? Another area that PLOS has been working on is something that we call Aperta, and it is our manuscript ingestion, screening, and publishing system. And so what we did is that we started working on this a few years ago, and it is meant to provide a modern, clean, simple interface for authors to be able to submit content. So it is now available in PLOS Biology, and what it does is that it takes dozens of minutes as opposed to dozens of hours in order to submit a paper, in order to have it go through the process, in order to have it go through revisions. And so it is a modern way for the systems to be working. It is on the back end very modular. It allows for those little boxes. I know the screens are hard to see, but each of those words has a little box, and you can drag and drop that. From an administration interface, you could change the workflow for an article, for an article type, for a journal, so you could actually experiment, and you could actually do a lot of different things that say, for this particular article type, I want to add an extra round of review, or I want to skip a round of review. And so that allows for that. So let's talk a little bit about data, because that's come up as well. From an open access standpoint, sure, that means that everyone can access the research. But from the perspective of reproducibility, open data means that everyone can do the research, and certainly the research that was behind that article. So PLOS has a data policy since 2014, and so what we have require is that all of our authors make their underlying data for that particular article available without restriction, and this is with very rare exception, but of course, for things like locations of endangered species. And when you submit your manuscript, you must submit a data availability statement. And so where we are now is that we have about 65,000 papers that have been published with a data availability statement. And so that is a very, very good start. But we are probably one of the very few, if not the only one, that makes this a requirement for submission to a journal. And so that is a very important stance that we took. But data management is hard. We can say we need the data, we can say that you must put the data there, but we can't actually police this. This is actually hard. Saying that the data is somewhere that's archivable, retrievable, preserved, hard. We don't actually do that work. So the vast majority of our data, for our articles, is posted at Figshare or at Dryad, and then there's some that are in data repositories as well. But this is a management problem, and this is something that I know that funders are getting involved and other organizations are getting involved in order to say, it's easy to say you have a policy. It's another thing to say that you're able to enable it, to interact with it, and that you're able to enforce it. Methods is another area where there's a lot of change going on here, and it's, again, about reproducibility. And so in this particular case, PLOS decided not to build something, and instead to partner. And so we partnered with protocols.io in order to link our articles from their methods sections to the methods that are available in an open way at protocols.io. And at protocols.io, the method will go through review, it will have comments, it will have interaction with the authors of that method, and it will actually change. So while the article may not, the piece that is really valuable, the piece that is reproducible, that will change, and that has a bit of a life beyond the article. The growing number of research output makes it really, really hard to assess all of these contributions. How many are there? Where are they? The linking of them, the availability, the interaction of them with one another. And so open standards is where all of this is going. And it's taken a while. You know, I mean, we all can accept the JAT standard. It took a while even for XML to be considered a standard. SGML, of course, was a time when everybody had their own DTD. But now, as more and more of these standards are emerging, including APIs within the technology, it allows the systems to talk to one another, allows us to make connections much more easily. And it's very important that we adopt them. If you don't adopt them, they're not going to go anywhere. There have been many versions of ORCID before ORCID. You know, a lot of people have tried for this kind of an ID. An institution ID is still elusive. That's still something that we're still working on. But ORCID is finally picking up. It's finally making sense. And this is also something that PLOS requires for your submission, that you have an ORCID ID. And if you don't, you go and you get one. It's fairly painless in order to do that. We also believe that credit is a very important part of our, not just our infrastructure, but part of our ecosystem. And so as publishers, we work with a very complicated set of pressures that are being exerted on these authors and these researchers. And they're around their career. They're around what do they need to do in order to advance their career. And for them right now, publishing is it. You know, they need to be an author. They need to be in that co-authorship of that paper. And so there are other ways to represent that. We've talked about peer review as being a review and how you get credit for that. Who would recognize that? Why would you want to make that open? These are all pressures on the research community that are starting to change, but it's been slow. So we use the credit taxonomy with our submissions, and this is probably not too hard. It's a little hard to read, but the point is that this is a taxonomy where people will say, you know, what role people played in creating this article, and they may not be one of the co-authors. And so it can be about, did I contribute to the software? Was I part of project administration? Did I help with some of the writing, but I'm still not an author? So this is something that we're able to provide a little bit more to all of those people who participate in creating that research, including that data, and give them credit for their CVs, for their future careers. And all of this is building up to creating an infrastructure for an author-centric perspective. We have for many, many years, hundreds of years, been operating with the publisher-centric perspective, a journal-centric perspective. And now that the author has more power, they have more choice, they have more decisions, the early career researchers are struggling very much with this. And so, you know, the seasoned Nobel Prize winners, yeah, they can write their own ticket. But there are hundreds of thousands, millions of early career researchers who are struggling in this space to make sure that they advance, that they have careers, and that they get recognized by their peers for their work. And so the standards that are being developed, whether they're DOIs or accession numbers or ORCIDs, are all part of the network that is creating. But it's important that we adopt them, that we actually use them. It's fine to say that they exist. It's fine to say that we did it for 25 papers, but when you have 30,000 papers, when you have 60,000 submissions, when you have hundreds of thousands of submissions, that's something else. That's really, it can make or break a lot of what you do and how you move forward. And so that's when we start seeing new models emerge, especially with the younger generation, a lot of the more tech-savvy generation who are willing to take a chance and to take a risk. And so this is when we start seeing the decoupling of publication from evaluation. And this is a very important thing. One of our surveys. We asked our authors to rank what was important to them about publishing with PLOS, or what's important with them in terms of publishing. And the number one thing was time. The amount of time it takes, the amount of time that it takes, particularly if they get a rejection along the way. And so how can we change that dynamic? How we can change that timetable? And so that we can accelerate research communication, accelerate how it gets shared and how it gets reused and how it gets discussed and communicated, to allow the possibility of credit before journal publication, before posting, to give people credit for the participation they have in the process, to combat publication bias, of course, because if that's all soaked up in our existing peer review process, how do we change that? And then also to change the dynamic of assessment to a post-publication peer review. And Liz Allen talked about this a little bit as well. So I think that the location of peer review in our ecosystem is something that we do want to experiment with moving around. So we've seen this in some way with preprints. And so inspired by arXiv, a lot of preprint servers, particularly in the biomedical sciences, have started popping up. So I would say that probably 6 from Center for Open Science just last month, 6 the month before. SSRN has launched BioRN as well as ChemRN. ChemArchive has come out with Figshare. arXiv and SSRN are like sort of the granddaddies in the area because they've been around since 1991, and they have reasonable numbers. They have big numbers. arXiv is over 1.3 million. But the rest of these areas, they have dozens. Hundreds, okay? So that from the representative standpoint of biomedical publishing right now, the preprint community has it covered about 2%. That's about it, 2%. And according to bioRxiv, about 40% of their content doesn't get published. It actually doesn't, it's not intended to go anywhere else. That's actually where it stops. So this is a huge landscape. We have a lot of headroom in the preprint space about what we want to do here regarding technology, regarding policy. How do we make this happen? We're also seeing the funder emerge as a publisher. Okay, so this is also a new dynamic that we're all watching. And so Chan Zuckerberg, they funded bioRxiv recently. And so that is, their beginning of saying, okay, this is something that we believe in, is the preprint, the early posting of the content. F1000 has emerged with Wellcome and with Gates, and as Liz noted, they have a couple more in the pipeline. As the funder starts becoming a publisher as well, as they start saying that we have a way of disseminating information and content that is outside the journal system, that is outside the publisher system, what does that do? How does that change what we do? Because these are new technologies that are coming out. So what role can we play? What opportunities do we have here? So I'm just going to talk about a few. So as I said, there's about 2% of the marketplace in preprints is actually getting out there in the biomedical space. What happens if publishing and publishers add preprints to our workflow? We have all the content. We get all the submissions, and we could really boost the adoption of these kinds of new life forms, like a preprint, by actually directing our submissions to preprint servers. But the technology to do that doesn't exist. So right now, if you go from bioRxiv to PLOS, you start all over again. So we've already asked everybody to do something additional, to go to a preprint server, and then to do something with journals. And this is true for arXiv as well. But how can we change that? How can we insert ourselves into the conversation? We already set and adopt content standards all over the place. And so right now, preprints are lowest common denominator, PDFs and metadata. Okay, and so we start seeing ourselves dumbed down into a pit where we can't get out. If all you have is a PDF, you can't do much more with that. You can't break out the figures. You can't do something with the references. You just can't. It's just a vehicle for display. So how can we set new standards for how that content is ingested? how that content is displayed, how that content is read, how the text and data mining works around that. What can we do about that? We already do that as our day-to-day job. How can we do that for a new output like a preprint? We can channel all of our vast experience and our scaled experience to doing that. 2% in biomedical sciences, that is ridiculous. So we could actually really drive that as a group. We can adopt the interoperable technical standards as they get developed to help with that communication between systems. That's what doesn't exist right now. And then, of course, we can advocate and educate the community. So when we think about how this might evolve at PLOS, and as how we think about this as part of our research ecosystem, is that if we could create submission interfaces, if we could create an experience for authors that would allow us to target and create many different outputs in addition to the one that we care about a lot, which is a peer-reviewed article, because that is still our bread and butter. That is still what keeps our lights on. That is still what keeps our wheels turning. So we cannot ignore that we have journals that we're publishing and articles that we're publishing. But in order to participate in these new worlds, in these new potentials, what can we do about that? Can we set new submission standards that allow us to repackage the content more easily, to disseminate it, to post it, to create standard sets of checks around that content, which could then save time down the road? And I think that that is really where those additional benefits really take hold, is where we're saving the author time, where we are saving the publisher's time in getting this information and getting this communication out there. And time is money. And so how would that change our financial situation? How would it change the cost of publishing? How would it change what it really takes in order to be part of the research ecosystem? And how can those conversations that happen all around that article get folded together with it? How could it be part of not just the preprint checks, if you will, but also the open reviews that we've been talking about, the post-publication commenting, even the little commenting that might happen with hypothesis? How can that all be folded in together as part of what that article output is? So when we think about these open platforms, we could be thinking about trying to standardize things more upfront, not at the display layer, not at the PDF, because that's when it's already dumbed down too much. But we actually start at the forefront, and we start at the beginning. And this is where a lot of the infrastructure technology is focused on the ingestion, the collection of the information, the processing of that information, and how much can we automate that? And so there's sort of the nuts and bolts of churning out content, but then there's also how can we think about it from the perspective of the reviewer and from the perspective of the editor and the author? How can we help them with their jobs of deliberating if the content is valid and viable? So I just want to talk a little bit about how am I doing with time? Okay, I'm almost done. So this is what I see is coming. We definitely are seeing a surge of the open source community. And so in this world, the idea is that the code is available to everybody, that people can check it out, they can fork it, they can check in new changes, and everybody, we basically share the development burden of where that code is going. It also provides a little comfort, if you will, that that code or that platform isn't just going to get bought by your biggest competitor, and all of a sudden the backbone that you were relying on is gone. And so that there is some of that within the open source community. We're seeing lots of coalitions of organizations with technology. That is absolutely happening. You've been hearing, you're going to hear about that throughout this program, that there are multiple publishers, multiple institutions, funders who are partnering with technology in order to further, their mission and their research space. The interoperability via standards is absolutely going through the roof. But again, adoption is very, very key. And it's getting easier to experiment. This is what you've been hearing. There are all these experiments with open peer review, experiments with display, experiments with, with metadata, with text and data mining. So there's all this that's happening, which is lowering the barriers to entry for lots of new players, lots of new market potential. But as an established publisher, what does that mean? So these are some of the lessons that we've learned. The open source benefits can be theoretical. It is a lot easier to say, oh yes, everybody can just use the code and we all are better for it. We have put code out there for years. Nobody's picked it up. And so it's taken a long time for Crossref to come and pick up our code. So these are the kinds of things where open source can be, it sounds great. And so I think that we need more examples of where that can really bootstrap the entire room, the entire organization, and let us all take that leap forward. There can be such a thing, sorry for the typo, as too much flexibility. This is what we found, is that we developed Aperta. We developed this manuscript system that could basically do anything. It could do everything. And so we put it at the feet of our editors, and we said, choose. And they chose the same path they always take. They chose, oh, what about the Google Doc that I always use? They chose the same process. They chose the same procedures and workflows. And because that is comfortable. There is a heart and mind aspect to technology that you cannot remove. This is not an automated automaton system. We use a lot of people. We have 7,000 editors. We have okay. Is it the mic is dead? Can you hear me? No. Should I talk louder? Or is the whole, did I break the whole system? Yes? Okay. I only have a couple slides, so we're done. So there is such a thing as too much flexibility. We do need to provide roadmaps, real direction for the people who work with us on these publications, on these decisions, on these articles. It is not easy to say, sure, you can just dismantle this and you can just move on. It is much harder when you have 60,000 papers that you need to handle every single year. It is absolutely harder for an established publisher to shift to new technology, and it is easier to launch something new on a new platform. So that is something to think about. If you want to experiment, it's sometimes not the best idea to start with PLOS 1, for example. It is easier to start with one section of PLOS biology. It's much easier to do that. And so you have to think about how long it takes you to turn wheels in order to make a change. The infrastructure takes time. The governance of some of this technology as well can add a lot of extra time. There needs to be agreement. There needs to be consensus. There needs to be a shared roadmap. There needs to be a gap analysis. All of this takes time, and it can actually rob you of moving forward. And so if you have to keep thinking about, from a technological standpoint and from an infrastructure standpoint, where are you trying to go? And are you matching your infrastructure with your end game? But there is a bright spot, that if we get it right, there is a lot of potential. There is a lot of upside on the other side of the rainbow. And we can make the experience for ourselves, for our authors, for our readers, way different. We can make it faster, we can make it more efficient, we can make it modern, and we can also make it cheaper. We can be more transparent, we can be more clear about what the cost of publishing is. This is the black box that everybody is trying to understand. Is it peer review? Is it our display technologies? Is it our conversion practices? Is it our PDF creation? What is it? How do we break that down and provide more understanding? Because the infrastructure is not free. That is another lesson that everybody here needs to understand, is that infrastructure, the cost of doing our business, isn't free, which is why we do charge something for it. And to look ahead to a time when it is completely free, I can't quite see that. I can't connect those dots personally. How the assessment of the work is actually captured throughout the life of the work, as both its peer review as well as its post-production, post-publication comments, and recognition and career advancement for these researchers is utterly the beginning and ending of why we do what we do. And if that doesn't change, if those incentives for how they get recognition don't change, we're going to keep publishing articles, and they're going to keep sending their articles to Science and Nature. That is absolutely the truth. And so we need to work on how that changes as well, because those hearts and minds need to change. The integrity of what we publish that's actually more at our fingertips. How we deal with data, how we deal with protocols, how we deal with open notebooks, all that substantial information that supports that journal article is absolutely something that we can start exposing so that that reproducibility and that change in science practice can happen. And the collaboration that we all have together, the collaboration spirit that we have with our technology partners is something that we absolutely need to keep moving up and keep bolstering. So thank you. I know it's warm, so you can take a big sigh. I don't know if I'm done.
So if there are any questions, yes, Stefan.
Thank you, Louise. It was a very nice talk. And at the very end, you mentioned money. I was a bit afraid that you would give a talk about infrastructure without talking about sustainability. Money it doesn't equal sustainability.
Yeah.
Would you like to elaborate a bit on this topic?
So, is this working? PLOS prides itself on being a sustainable, open access publisher at scale. And I think that is a very important aspect of why we are a good example in the open access world. The investment that we've made in technology has been substantial, has been utterly substantial. And the investment that we make in our editorial processes and the partners and our manuscript technologies is very substantial. And so we very much want to change that and lower that and reduce those barriers to entry so that we can pass that on to the authors and to the researchers and to the readers. But right now, it's still very expensive to do our jobs. And partly it is because some of this technology is so old. It doesn't change quickly. We have a saying at PLOS that it takes 6 months and $60,000 to do almost everything that we do. And that kind of rate of progress, when all these talks, feel to me like, nipping at my heels of all these different things that are coming up that I can't do and that I really want to do. And from a sustainability standpoint, we have to focus on APCs right now, because publishing is what keeps our lights on. And then what is it that we want to do to further our open access, open science, God bless you, open science agenda in a sustainable way? How can we set examples and standards for that so that everybody else can benefit from that? And that's what we want to try to do as part of our mission.
Any more questions? All right, we can carry on. Louise, thank you very much.